Welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I am your host, Brian Call, and I am joined by my brother, the Gritty Broman. How are you, Brent?
I'm well. Thanks.
Brent just finished editing the podcast that's going out today, and it is with myself and my buddy Anthony. So for those that were following along on our archery mule deer hunt, this is kind of our podcast to cap that hunt off and kind of share it publicly, like the details. Mm-hmm. So what'd you think of the show?
I want Anthony on the podcast more.
Yeah.
I really like Anthony.
It's funny. Anthony was Brent's nightmarish Boy Scout leader when you were coming up.
I think I was 12 to 14.
Yeah.
And he was like the assistant scoutmaster. The actual scoutmaster was Greg Steele.
He was also nuts.
He was also nuts. I don't know which one of them came up with the idea, but basically they took us they took us camping every month. Once a month, they took the Boy Scouts out. Really, it was an excuse for them to go scouting. So they got...
Or hunt. Like, I remember when they took you guys to the Oregon coast.
They went
on a camping
hunting.
trip. And then while they ditched you guys, they went and hunted ducks in the morning.
That was the first time I've ever had duck.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember Brother Steele basically fed me raw meat because they...
Good man.
They don't really know how to cook game meat. Just shoot it a bunch.
Yeah.
And so he basically pan-seared it in some butter on each side for about 10 seconds. And he's like, you have to eat it raw, otherwise it's leather. And I've learned since that is not true.
Well, it is with duck meat. Duck really is, wild duck really is much better, mostly raw. And
or
because it's
jerky. Duck jerky is my favorite.
Yeah, it is good too. But anyway, today's podcast is with Anthony. We got together post mule deer hunt. And for those that were following on the Instagram story, I storied the whole thing. There's a part 1 and a part 2 on my Instagram page. If you go to the highlights, you can go and just kind of follow along with how that hunt went. It was a blast. It was an awesome hunt. But in today's podcast, we go over what worked, what didn't work. Kind of it's a migration mule deer archery hunt. There's a few of those in the West here that you can do in different states. And it's a cool hunt. It's a really cool hunt. So you said you had some questions about the hunt.
I have one specific question because you guys talked about the mule deer kept picking you guys out of the tree stand and out of the blinds and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you guys said it was because you kind of got a little sloppy with where you put your tree stand. Mm-hmm. Anthony got skylined one time. Mm-hmm. I'm curious how do you go about picking out the spot to put a tree stand? Because normally, when I go hunting with a tree stand, you've already put a tree stand there, so I've never had to go and pick one out.
Yeah, it's funny. Years ago, when I hung my first tree stands, I don't know, early 2000s, I remember going in and setting, just seeing deer traffic in a seriously busy highway of deer activity. So I went there, hung my stand, and I sat there all the time, like for the first season that I saw a billion does and fawns. I didn't see a single buck.
I've seen the footage.
Not a single buck came by during that whole season. So then game cameras came out about that time. So I hung cameras up all over the property, like 10 cameras. And what I learned was 365. I had these cameras up. What I learned was 8 out of the 10 places I had cameras, a buck never walked in 365 days. In a full year span, they never even went there.
And you were religious about checking those cameras.
Oh, yeah. They were batteried up. They were year-round. I wanted to see kind of what was going on. So just kind of, I realized that, and this is small acreage, okay, where we were at.
5-6 acres.
Yeah, in a suburban kind of area. So there's homes, 5-acre lots. There's property. It's wooded, heavily wooded. Mm-hmm. So, I don't think these deer travel great distances, right? Mm-hmm. During the rut, though, there were a few places where bucks would show up. I'd see them once and never see them again, cruising during the rut. So that's what's great about the rut, period, is you never know what's going to happen. But I learned that you just can't go out and hang a stand anywhere. And just because you see deer activity there doesn't mean that's where you're going to see a big buck. Mm-hmm. But in general, the rule of thumb is if you can set up where there's a lot of does during the rut, eventually a big buck will come.
Eventually.
And it's the same thing with elk hunting. If you can set up where all the cows are hanging out and there's tons of cows and calves, eventually the bulls will kind of roll in and start checking for cows that are in heat. So, but sometimes, for whatever reason, I just noticed bucks won't go in certain places. They just, they do follow the does to a certain spot, especially nocturnal blacktail in these small acreage areas. They'll go as far as like 100 yards from the apple tree, and then they're like, I'm not going to cross that fence and go in the open. Like they stage there.
They sound like a bunch of shut-ins.
Dude. And they wait for the does to come back to them, So if you're going to set up, you need to be set up in the staging area on the edge of the habitat instead of like right where they feed. And if you watch the hunting public, which I highly recommend if you tree stand hunt at all, I love those guys. I love their quality of their production, and they're on YouTube, and they're really good at teaching people where to put a tree stand. And you watch any episode, they're kind of mapping their strategies. Which way is the wind blowing? What are the deer doing? Understanding deer movement. But one of the things that's consistent with the hunting public, and they're killing a lot of these animals on public land, these whitetails on public land in areas you just wouldn't think you could get good public land hunting, but they find it. They're setting their stands up in locations next to bedding areas. I mean, they really, really, really push into bedding areas. Conventional wisdom in the whitetail world in general is, hey, don't disturb the bedding area. Stay away from that. Get in that transition phase between where they feed and where they bed and kind of set up there. But don't get too close to the bedding area, because then what you do is you spook them and then they go nocturnal, or the big bucks just never come out again, or they leave. So, but consistently what we've found, and what I think is true with blacktail as well, if you're not like right in their bedding area, like right on the edge, you're not going to see them before dark.
How do you get into that bedding area and set up a tree stand without them like figuring that out?
Well, I mean, there's lots of ways. When we were blacktail hunting on small acreage, we would move in really. We'd do it in August or July or June.
Oh, okay.
We set it up months ahead of time.
Oh, okay.
And when you have control over the property, and it's not public land, especially, man, we would clear a dirt trail. Like literally, we would scrape every leaf away. We'd bring a rake. We'd bring.
I remember you having shears and going through and cutting branches.
We'd bring a weed whacker and just gas weed whacker and just. And so that you can walk in absolutely silent,
Oregon
not touching a bush.
Is a legit rainforest.
Yeah. And so we would map all that stuff in ahead of time.
Salt the earth.
Yeah. So and then when the leaves fell, we would take a day to kind of, as quiet as possible, move the leaves off the dirt path so that we could walk in and out without making noise. The other thing was, I mean, basically you can look at Google Earth and you can see where the low spots are on mountains. You can see where with a satellite image, you can see where there are trees, where there's a river, where there's physical barriers. And I've been hunting been hunting long enough that I can kind of predict where deer are going to walk. And it's crazy because they literally want to walk. They want to walk the laziest path possible, usually.
My kind of people.
Where the land is the lowest, where there's the least hills to climb and to go down, and so on. And so you can kind of find funnels and pinch points that are narrow where deer want to cross. And then when there's fresh snow, like where we were at, you can confirm that once you get your feet on the ground that, yes, in fact, you are correct. You can look at what they feed on. A lot of these deer love sage flats, these mule deer. They come out and they feed on these big open sage flats, and you'll just see them just eat the sage like crazy. They browse right there, and they'll like to have, we talk about it on the podcast, edge habitat, where they have like a thick forest and then boom, it's a sage flat right next to it, so they can go back and forth between the two habitats. And they often spend a lot of time on the edge of the two habitats. So, just putting some of these pieces together, fresh snow is huge because, even if it's old snow, you can still see kind of patterns where, gosh, there's a whole open hillside and there's not a single track on it hardly. And yet there's a highway along this one spot where the deer have dug a trench walking through it. So, you can figure it out. You can figure it out where to put a tree stand. And there's you can look at where you think they might be bedding. You can think of where they might be feeding and how they transition between the two. And then when you're looking at bucks, when you're thinking about bucks want to smell a doe. They want to find a doe that's in heat. And so they want to walk downwind of wherever they think these girls are hanging out. And so they'll run ridges, or they'll walk a ridge where they can smell, as the wind's blowing up, anything down below, or vice versa, depending on the time of day. And they'll scent check. They'll run these ridges and they'll scent check them to see if there's anything blowing their way. And they'll go, oh, I smell girls. And then they'll run down and check them out. And then they'll come back up, hit the ridge, and keep going. So during the rut, if you can sit in these spots where they make these circuits, where these
they're
bucks
trying to catch some wind.
They're just doing this circuit every day, every 3 days, a 3-day circuit where they're just checking all the girls in these areas. Once they find one that smells ready or is close to being ready, it's like, oh, they just stick on that one, right? Or they'll be like, oh, she'll be ready in a day. I'll come back for her. I'm going to go find one that's ready right now, And the old bucks, they know this. They know when she's ready, when she's not. The young bucks are too stupid, and they'll follow a girl for 3 days that's not there yet, and he'll just he just knows something's close. The old bucks, a lot of times, they'll be like 3 young bucks chasing a doe. An old buck will show up, oh no, and then they'll come back the next day because she's ready.
And then scrap all the little young bucks.
Yeah. So anyway, the critical thing to me is when you move into a tree stand and you move out of a tree stand, you do it with as minimal impact as possible. And during the rut, what I found is they're so distracted with sex, and we can all relate. And you go in with a red headlamp because they don't really see the red spectrum, red light.
That's why a lot of headlamps already have red lights.
Yeah, and you go in in the middle of the night, and I think they have great nighttime vision. But still, it's like I've seen deer, blacktail especially, they look at you and they're like, I know there's something there. I'm going to slink away.
But they're going to circle back.
But they don't blow out unless they smell you. And then they slink away in the dark. Now, if I come in during the daylight and they get a visual and they know exactly what I am, I've seen them leave for days. So I do like going in the dark, getting in my stand in the dark, about an hour or a half hour before daylight, at least, because I also notice, this is in the blacktail woods in Oregon, that as you move into your location, you think you're not disturbing anything because you're so stealthy. But once you sit down in your tree and you're there 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, you can hear the forest come alive. You send an inaudible ripple effect through the woods when you go through it. Each squirrel, each rabbit, each whatever bird, they go silent as you're moving through the woods. It's like they know you're there. And then as soon as you're up in your tree and you're stationary and you're not moving a muscle, all of a sudden they start coming out and doing things. And I think that it's like, they sense you coming through long before you're there. They go quiet. The next animal goes quiet. The next thing goes quiet. The next and the next. And then after you've been there a little while and they don't hear any or see anything disturbing, they all kind of come out of the woodwork again. Well, I think deer are super in tune to their environment and they pick up on that. Pick up on that. So if you can get in there in the dark, get up in your stand and be there. This is a lot of conventional whitetail wisdom among, or knowledge among guys that have been doing this a long time. Us guys out west, though, I think it's a foreign thing, but I think it's highly effective. And you'll hear in this podcast, Anthony's hunted this. This is his 4th year. This is his best year at probably the worst year of deer activity, and yet the best opportunities he had at actually shooting giant bucks because of the tactics. And he's like, dude, I had a blast. He's said this before. I've had a blast hunting them on foot. I had a billion close encounters and then never really closed the deal. Here, I had opportunities where I should have closed the deal and didn't, and that was my own fault. And so, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Certainly, you got to pay attention to conditions. I think that some of the best spot and stalk guys, they know when to put a stalk on a deer and when not to, based on its location, how it's moving, all that kind of stuff. So,
I have one other question.
Yeah.
Are you peeing in a bottle?
No, not really. I mean,
because you're up there for hours.
A lot of people, this is like a controversy among guys, do you pee on the ground out of your stand, or do you get out of your stand? What do you pee in a bottle? I think, especially if you're going in and out a lot, you can make your own rub, your own scent post. You just pee in the same spot a billion times. Pretty soon, all the bucks will start peeing there too.
Really?
Urine kind of smells like I think they say like within 10 minutes or 15 minutes of your urinating, it smells like you can't tell it really difference, the urine between any animal. Like
really?
Between us and a deer and a bear and all that. It's all chemically kind of the same.
Huh. More
or less. So there's not a huge difference. So a lot of guys will pee right off their stand and a buck will walk by minutes later and smell it. I think it depends on how skittish and on edge the deer are. Because I do think you can pee off a stand and then all of a sudden a doe that's like just super, just switched on.
Ready to rock.
She smells fresh urine. She's like, I don't know what it is. It could be another deer, but I don't care. I can't see it and I don't like that it's this close and then I'm smelling it. I'm out, Other deer that are rutting and they're all turned on, they're like, "Ooh, yeah, another smell. There's probably another girl over here." And they come cruising through. Like, I think it can be an attractant. So I think it just depends on your strategy and what you're doing. I noticed that when the deer were a little switched on, seemed a little skittish, and there was one giant buck that seemed to be like just ultra aware. And so peeing in a bottle bringing a bottle to pee in is at least in that sense, you're guaranteed you're not going to disturb anything or set anything off. If you pee on the ground, but I saw Anthony peed on the ground a bunch and his wind went right to bunches of deer and they didn't care. I peed on the ground a bunch on some days and other days I peed in a bottle just because I felt like a couple of times I peed and 10 minutes later a deer walked in and they immediately were like, okay, I smell fresh urine, but where is it? So, but all in all, I don't think it matters. For the most part, I don't think it matters.
Cool.
So there you have it. I think people will enjoy this podcast. I enjoy hanging out with Anthony. The ending of the podcast, we ran out of battery on the camera. So it's straight up audio for the last 20 minutes, I think.
A little longer than that.
20 or 30 minutes. So for those that watch it on YouTube, you're going to lose visual for the last 20 or 30 minutes. But sorry about that. Anything else want to cover? Nope. So, folks, thanks for tuning into the podcast. Leave us a comment on YouTube. We love that. Send us DMs, emails. Go to briancall.com. You can see all our films there. Sign up for our newsletter. We're doing some giveaways. We're going to try to launch our first video of the mule deer series with Lampers and I. Late season rifle mule deer. Sunday.
Yep.
And
we're doing lots of giveaways this month.
We're doing a bunch of giveaways.
Trekking poles, spotting scopes, some bows.
Benchmade knives. Yes. So we're going to do giveaways around the videos. So as we roll them out. So watch the videos and find out how you can win. And that's it, I think. Use the code GRITTY at Mountain Ops to save, get free shipping. Use the code GRITTY at Sissy Sticks to get yourself a sweet set of trekking poles, half carbon fiber, half aluminum.
Use GRITTY at Heather's Choice, get 10% off, whatever you want.
Get
some packaroons, send some to me.
Get some packaroons, get some breakfast, get some salmon chowder, all that backpacking, all those backpacking needs.
That's it.
Thanks for tuning in. Stay gritty. Welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I am your host, Brian Call, and I'm joined by my buddy, Anthony Spencer. We finished our mule deer hunt. For those that were watching, we went on an archery mule deer hunt late season in the snow about a week ago. We wrapped up the hunt.
About a week.
And this hunt was actually, it was pretty awesome, actually. It was my first time bow hunting this late season.
Yeah.
And but it's your fourth year.
My fourth time on that hunt.
Okay.
I'm trying to get you to listen to me for 3 years.
Telling me, hey, this is a cool hunt. You should do it. Late season, I got some spots. So we did it, and a lot of people tuned in. There was like 12,000 people a day watching the Instagram story, which was pretty cool. And we kind of just brought people along. So this podcast is kind of we're going to talk about, a lot of questions came through, like, why did you bow hunt this? And why not spot and stalk? And a lot of other things about the hunt. And I think we should cover that, why we did it, the way we did it, and kind of all the things that we learned on it. What worked, what didn't work. So doing that, for those who don't know, Anthony Spencer, we grew up together since kids, basically.
Yeah.
And went to the same high school together. And we've been hunting together pretty much most of our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. Seriously, since 07, I think.
Yep.
Like every year.
So we had a sweet archery hunt. Now, we could get into like the details of how we screwed up, but let's wait for that for later.
Screw up.
Yeah. We went into this area. It's a public land hunt, so you're dealing with, for those that follow the story, people driving through on their UTVs and their quads.
4-wheelers and
illegally, by the way.
Yeah.
Ruining some of your hunting spots.
It's just been kind of normal. It's gotten worse over the last 4 years, but I've had that every year.
Yeah.
It gets a little more every year, but.
So, let's talk about, why did we tree stand hunt this thing?
Yeah, so I started hunting this, like I say, 4 years ago by myself. I went the first 2 years by myself, spent 10, 11 days up there each time. And I did all spot and stalk those first 2 years and had an absolute blast. I told you guys came this year and you loved it, had a great hunt, but I honestly think it was about half to 2/3 of the deer I usually see on that hunt.
Yeah, and that's a problem with some of these migration hunts and these hunts that happen in these cold weather regions. You have entire winters where you have a mass die-off.
Right.
And that's the biggest thing that impacts mule deer, really.
Yeah.
Is weather.
Yeah, and everybody knows we had a huge, winter loss in 2016.
Not everybody knows, because we're not telling people about this in much detail.
Right. Well, 2016 was a rough winter everywhere in the West, is all I'm saying. And so I started hunting right before that. 15, 16, 17, 18. No, I guess I started hunting 16. I started hunting that year. And it has declined since then, is all I'm getting at.
Yeah.
This year being the lowest amount of deer total and big buck sightings that I've had in the 4 years I've hunted it. So
yeah, we ran into quite a few people out there that were like, yeah, this hunt is just not what it used to be. And you find that on especially mule deer hunts across the West.
Yeah.
They ebb and they flow depending on harsh winters.
Yeah.
And I would say civilization.
Yeah, because mule deer, no secret that mule deer are down,
across the West.
Yeah, across the West, yeah. They have been declining for a long time. You got pockets going good and bad. But we were warned before we ever got here. I got a buddy that lives in the area, and he warned me, Anthony, don't expect to see many deer on your hunt. It's gotten worse since you started hunting this.
Yeah.
And he was right for the sense of it was fewer, but we still found deer, we still found bucks, and we still found good bucks, just not quite the number we had before.
Yeah, and I want to get into that later because, a lot of people went up there and never saw a mature deer.
Yeah.
We saw a lot.
Yeah.
We were into them. We had them in bow range. So there's a difference between your kind of average guy that gets out and then, getting after it the way we did.
Yeah. So like I said, started earlier, I spent 2 years purely spot and stalking. And I had gobs and gobs of close calls and a few bucks that I passed up that I kind of wish I wouldn't have. And so it's not like it didn't work. Mm-hmm. The spot and stalking was fun. I'd spent 10 days on the mountain by myself, camped at the top of the mountain, and had an absolute blast. And every time felt like I was going to bring a buck home.
Yeah.
But I didn't. So the third year, cousin Ben came, and we hunted it together, and we started doing a little bit, because after the first 2 years, I started really noticing, hey, there are just a few key areas that I constantly see bucks pass by go through this saddle or cross this ridge top or whatever. And I thought, man, if a guy would just sit there,
right,
probably kill a buck. So the third year, Ben and I did some spot and stalking, and then we did a little bit of ground blind. And I put up a ground blind. I can't remember if Ben put up a stand or not. But we did some just sitting and trying to ambush. And I killed a buck that year. I actually killed him spot and stalking. It wasn't a very big buck. but I just was
He's
really
a nice buck. He's
it's
wide.
like a 20-inch 3-point. I mean, I was just tired of not getting a deer. I didn't want to, get skunked again the third year in a row. And so I shot that buck when I just saw a good opportunity and didn't pass it up. Ben had, just like me from years before, multiple opportunities at big mature bucks and just didn't quite get it done.
The story of Ben's life over the last 2 or 3 years is just incredible close encounters, and you cannot seal the deal.
Yeah, and you can, if you follow the Instagram story, you'll see a picture of a 4x5 that Ben had 3 or 4 or 5 opportunities at last year that just couldn't quite get it.
It was a well-followed story, but if you want to go and see the hunt as it unfolds day by day, you can go to my Instagram page, Brian Call, at Brian_Call. You go to my Instagram page and look at the highlights, and you can find the Instagram story. It's part 1 and part 2, because I think you're only allowed like so many slides per story, so per highlight. So if you want to just see it, kind of how we approached it day by day, you can go check out the story. It's there for everyone.
So after that third year, when I ground blind hunted, I'll fully admit I did not give mule deer enough credit.
Yeah.
I thought I've had so many experiences where I've hid from mule deer out in plain view, basically, just by not moving, and they just don't see you. So I stuck a ground blind in a spot that had a lot of buck traffic, and the ground blind stood out like a sore thumb, and I didn't think the mule deer would care, and bottom line is, yes, they did care. And the deer we had come in, I sat it a bunch, Ben sat it, they were picking us off in the ground blind big time.
What's so strange about that was this year, Brett was with us, our buddy Brett, and he set up a ground blind. He set it up much better than you did.
Yeah.
Like really.
Well, Brett's killed a lot of blacktails out of a ground blind.
Right. But one thing that was interesting was he parked his quad down by the road, and he's up on a mountain ridge, and you could see the quad down there.
Yeah, it's only a couple hundred yards.
And does and bucks walked right by his quad without any concern.
That's right.
They hung up on your blind, but they didn't give a dang about the quad on the road.
And I think part of that is because it was on the road.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They just expect to see those things on the road. It doesn't shock them to see those there.
They looked at it and were like, yeah, there it is, whatever. Yeah. And then this massive buck just stood there. He filmed it with his phone. But I've noticed even so this is something we'll talk about a little bit later, but we underestimated mule deer because our tree stand setups were also sloppy.
Yeah, overly exposed. Yeah, we were concentrating more on the right location as far as deer movement.
And I assumed that mule deer were a little dumber and wouldn't look up.
Never look up. Yeah,
and just
quite the opposite.
They were the worst I've ever hunted.
Like you said, they don't booger as quick when they see you.
No.
But they sure pick you just as quick as a black-tail or white-tail, maybe even worse, because the sound was ridiculous, the way the sound was carrying. Yeah. We couldn't get away with the slightest movement up there. And I truly believe it was the sound first that was getting them to look. Yeah.
That, and I did a little more reading about deer eyesight and the way, a deer can almost see their hips. Yeah. They can see, unless you're exactly right behind their butt. They see at an angle from just outside their hips all the way around to the front. And their pupil doesn't move like ours does. Like we can zero in, focus on an object. So they see movement. So it's almost like a GoPro screen, and they just see something move across the screen, but their eyes don't really move. Huh. And so what's interesting is it just takes across that giant view, all it takes is a flicker, and they will pick it up. So they really did see movement, I think, quite well. Yeah. Combine that with their gigantic ears and the quietness.
Yeah, the windy days, it wasn't as big of a problem.
Oh, we had bucks. We passed, by the way, we could have tagged out on a lot of 3x3s. I could have tagged out on a nice 3x3, maybe in the 140 range. But after seeing those other big bucks, I couldn't do it.
Yeah, I had a pretty little 4x4 come right under my stand 12 yards, oblivious to me.
Well, that 3x3 that came in and stood underneath your stand that you got on video on that windy day, you could have shot him 6 times.
18 yards,
and he was a nice buck too, just not those not that maturity level as those big ones.
Right.
But he also hit your tracks.
Oh man, that's the other thing. So I was so concerned, we used to do a ton, well, you still do for whitetails. We used to do a ton of tree stand hunting for blacktails. Grew up blacktail hunting like crazy. And I always wore rubber boots, knee-high rubber boots, and I was always really concerned about the brush that would hit my legs, anything that was material and not rubber.
Just like your typical whitetail.
Typical whitetail.
If you walk into a buck's bedroom and you're wearing leather boots, they just lock onto that trail. They know a human has been there and they're out.
Well, and that's what happened. So when I was walking through this little sagebrush ravine that I had to cross to get into my tree stand, knowing full well I'm crossing the trail that they're using, they're going up and down the ravine. I was so concerned about the sagebrush hitting my legs because I did not have rubber boots on like you did.
Yeah.
And so I was really trying to step over it, but there was areas I couldn't help it. I brushed against sagebrush. But what I found was in the snow.
It's about 4 inches deep.
Yeah.
5.
Yeah. But time after time, deer after deer after deer, they would stop and sniff my footprints. They paid no attention to where I rubbed against the brush. No attention. They would walk right by it, feed by it, nothing. But the second their nose got to a footprint, boom, their nose goes right in it, and they instantly went on alert.
Yep. They jump back, then they'd stick their nose forward, like inch it into the footprint, and they'd be, for sure. Yeah. I smell.
And it didn't matter. Spikes, does, bucks, it didn't matter. They all did it right in the footprints.
Yep. And depending on the maturity level of the deer, they would either spook and get out of there. The older the deer, the smarter the deer, the more they were like, I'm out. The younger the deer, the more they freaked, but just sort of stood around.
Yep. Yeah, so that was surprising. I had bucks stand right by where I know I brushed against the sagebrush, and they didn't even pay any attention.
But what was equally fascinating to me was you walked the road all the way up.
Oh yeah.
And then you cut across off the road. You went off road through the sagebrush to your stand. They walked up the road, smelled your tracks, didn't care.
Didn't bother
them at all as long as you were on the gravel road. Yeah. As soon as you went 50 yards off the road, alert.
And by the way, it's a road closed. It's not like this is an open traffic road.
Yeah, no one's if you're on this road, you're walking it.
Yeah.
But they still didn't care.
They didn't care at all. And we'd have tracks every day when we'd leave our stands over top of our tracks.
They'd walk up the road, didn't care that human scent was on the road, didn't care at all.
And that included some big bucks too that did that, didn't care.
Yep.
Yeah, that was pretty fascinating to see.
Now, back to your comment about, we grew up, we're no strangers to hunting in a freezing cold stand on the foothills in Mount Hood or the Upper Clackamas outside of Estacada,
right?
Where we kind of grew up hunting blacktails, and so we've froze our butts off in stands waiting for giant bucks that are migrating,
right,
through areas. So this hunt is a very familiar type of hunt for us.
Yeah.
To approach it with the tree stand style, like we use for blacktail often, was just kind of old hat for us. We've done it for a long time.
That's what I made that comment. This hunt feels like our old Upper Clackamas hunts, Mount Hood hunts.
Totally. It just feels like the bucks are bigger.
Yeah, the bucks are bigger, a little more open country, but we're setting up the same thing. Like we found saddles, edge habitat. Always with blacktails, it was always finding edge habitat. Where does the old growth meet the new growth, meet the clear cut? The more habitats that come together in one spot, that's where you wanted to be. If there was a rub line there, all the better.
Yep. And funnels, like, these deer don't want to walk through the giant aspen patch. They want to walk along the edge of those two habitats. You got a big sage flat, and then you have an aspen patch. Those deer will hit that out, and they'll walk along the edge of it rather than out in the open.
Right.
And rather than in the thick.
Yeah.
And because you've hunted there, this is your 4th year, but 3 previous years, and you've glassed and you've watched, you knew where a lot of pinch points and funnels were.
Yeah, I had a good idea. Everybody, Ben had tree stands up, Brett had his ground blinds up, you had stands, I had stands. These were all areas that I had observed deer passing through a lot in the last 3 years.
And you add that observation with fresh snow every couple of days, where you can see fresh tracks of big bucks, and you're like, okay, it sort of removes a lot of the ambiguity or the question. Like, it's like, well, I know big bucks come through this. I see him there every few days during this hunt, you know, when I'm glassing from far away with a spotter. And then you get on the ground and a fresh snow is hit, and sure enough, a fresh set of buck tracks go through that. You're like, okay, this would be a good spot to sit.
Yeah. If I sat here long enough, the buck's going to come through there. Yeah, so that's... And I think the other thing people need to understand, too, because you had a lot of people saying, why aren't you spotting stock? It looks like perfect country to spot and stock. One thing you got to understand, these bucks, like I asked you, what was it, day 4 or 5? You go, hey, should we get down spot and stock? You kind of asked me that question.
Yeah.
And I'm
regurgitating
like,
one.
yeah, and you had seen more deer than any of us,
yeah.
right? You had been kind of in the hot spot. And I said, Brian, of all the bucks you've seen so far, how many could you have put a stock on? What did you say?
It's 0.
0. Why?
They moved.
They're moving constantly.
All over. Yeah, constantly cruising. So the big bucks I saw, if they had a doe, okay, it was like they were on that doe and they were running up a hill, down a hill, across the ravine, up the ravine. So it was a constant chase. And by the time I got over there to a spot, I mean, and trying to do it sneakily, that buck wouldn't have been there.
Wouldn't have gone. And that's what I had for the last 3 years. Oh, there's a buck. Great. I take off. And I get there and either A, he is so long gone, was long gone before I ever got in the area, or B, they're chasing and all you can do is go, I'm going to sit right here and hope one of those chases comes by me. And sometimes that kind of almost worked, but it just was a real gamble.
The other thing too was, you know, for the bucks that didn't have does, for sure they were running all over the place, cruising. And you'd see one on this ridge, you'd watch him walk all the way down, up the other mountain, all like almost in a straight line, cruising.
It's like, how far could you see? That's as long as you got to watch that buck. Because as soon as he was out of sight, he just was keep going.
Yeah,
he was gone.
So you'd have to to get in front of him. I mean, you could look at a giant mountain ridge, and you could be like, well, 2 mountains over, if I get there. But then, what if he gets bumped by a doe, or he finds the scent, and then boom, they take a hard right, and it's over.
So that's why we decided to ambush hunt, really.
And I would say this too, that, you know, even though the bucks are rutting and they're kind of dumb, because man, that buck that came to you and got real close to you while Anthony was reading a book.
Oh, I was studying a topic that was of great importance.
He looks up, giant buck there, and he is caught with his pants down.
I truly felt like I was looking up every couple seconds, but
no.
From what you tell me, that buck was in sight for a long time.
Oh, dude, I watched. It was a train wreck I had to watch because I spotted the buck. I ranged, and he's 85 yards from me, which is just too far. 80, 85, and he never stopped long enough.
Nose to the ground, he's just moving.
Yeah, he'd stop for a sec, look, like there was no stopping him. Clueless about anything. He was on does. His mind was not on alert at all. Yeah. And I'm watching him, and Anthony's 300 yards away, but this deer is on a string to pass by his stand, and I'm looking at Anthony through the binos, looking at the buck through the binos, looking at Anthony through the and I'm looking at the buck, and Anthony's got his face in a book, and he's reading the book, and I'm like,
how do you know I wasn't looking for deer the other way?
I'm just dying, like, come on, look up, Anthony. Come on, look up, Anthony. Look up. Sure enough, that buck, by the time you saw him, he was 50, 60?
He's 45 yards.
45 yards. So
nose to the ground, cruising right by me.
But the point of that, you tried to get a shot off, but he was moving too much.
Yeah.
But he watched you reach for your bow. He watched you draw. He watched you grunt, rangefinder.
He got 3 times he picked my movement from.
He looked right at you and he's like, I don't like that. But then he just went right back to, where's the doe?
Yeah.
Where's the dumber than a rock?
Yeah.
Now, earlier, 2 hours earlier, there was another buck bigger than him actually that came in. Was a little dumb like that, but wised up real quick.
Yeah.
Somehow or another, his spidey sense went off. He was on another level of alert.
Was I reading a book on that one?
You were. Because Anthony should have shot that buck as well. That just kills me. But that buck, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the thing is, what I was going to get at, back to the topic, was if a buck is by himself cruising, he's not holding still long enough to really get a stock on him when they're rutting this hard.
Right.
And we never saw him stop and eat or anything.
No.
They're just going from one doe to the next. And they're dumb, but they're on the move.
Yeah.
Now, then you come across a buck that's on a doe. He's also dumb, but guess what? The stupid doe isn't that dumb.
Yeah.
The does are, even when you're on a rutting doe, they still seem to have some wherewithal. You know, they still pick you out of a tree and go, wait, where a dumb buck,
Yeah.
And so you're not just sneaking up on the buck often, you're sneaking up on the doe.
Yeah.
And as much as you want the doe to be an idiot, they're not.
Yeah.
So, not that you can't do it, spot and stalk. Like you said, you came like a hair's width from scoring so many times.
And really, I could have shot at bucks several times that weren't the buck I wanted to shoot at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those bucks, I look back, I'm like, what was I thinking passing a buck like that? That was crazy.
What happens is you see 2 or 3 giants.
Yeah.
And then some 160 buck walks by and you're like, but there's that deer.
Or he's busted, you know,
Mm-hmm.
which, you know, you think, oh, I don't want one that's busted. He's just a stud of a buck, but he's broken. And that was crazy. I should have shot him.
Well, I think, you know, one thing we decided coming into the hunt this year that, you know, we've learned from blacktail hunting, if you sit long enough in some of those corridors where these bucks are rutting hard after does and traveling, it's only a matter of time before you get a great shot opportunity on a really big buck.
Yeah.
You say that's true?
Yeah, absolutely. That was the whole thought behind this is rather than have all these close calls that in 3 years I've only killed one buck, you know, let's just sit still and when one comes in, it'll be dead as long as you're not reading a book or something like that.
Right. So, and sure enough, it worked out actually. You and I both should have tagged out on this hunt if we were a little more alert.
Well, and in our defense, I will say that while you can catch a lot of criticism, especially from Western hunters, about sitting in a tree stand, because it seems kind of brainless.
Yeah.
It's not easy to sit from a half hour before daylight till a half hour after dark, 10 days in a row.
Well, I've always said that sitting in a tree stand is a whole different form of mental toughness.
Yeah.
Especially when your toes and your hands are frozen.
Freezing cold. And so it's something to pass the time kept me in the stand versus getting down where I now didn't have a chance to shoot something. So it sucks. I had to learn a lesson twice in one day that reading that book wasn't good.
A lot of times when we were blacktail hunting, you might be in crunchy snow or there would be crunchy leaves on the ground.
Yeah.
And you can hear a deer coming from a mile away. I mean, they cannot sneak through the woods without making noise because the ground just won't permit it. And especially when they're rutting, they tend to trot and make more noise. But the situation here was we had a fresh snow that day. So there are times where I have used a visual Kindle reading book.
Yeah.
And times I use an audio book.
Yeah.
And I use the audio book on days when the ground is fresh snow and it's dead silent. So I can use my eyes. And then when the ground's super loud and I'm probably going to hear them before I even see them, I might read.
Yeah.
And so it depends on the situation. You just made a poor decision. And
well, that day was dead calm. You know, no sound. Yeah.
And what's the part that hurts the most is because you could have shot 2 giants that day. Is the part that hurts the most is that you know better.
Yeah, no, and it was so preventable.
You're not a rookie.
No, I know, but I hadn't tree stand hunted much lately. I needed to relearn a few things, and when I got down, you remember this? When I got down and turned back and looked at my setup, I was like, oh, no wonder. Like I had no idea I stuck out that bad against the skyline.
Yeah. And I didn't either.
Yeah, it was bad.
Because from where I'm at, the whole mountain is your backdrop. But when you get down on the game trail that the deer were on and you look back at your setup, you might as well have been standing up there, you know, shouting.
Yeah, on the moon there.
Yep.
It was like skylining yourself on a ridge line.
Yeah.
Like I was sticking out like a sore thumb. So that's where I really went wrong with the tree
big
stand
mistake.
setup. Yeah.
Big mistake on the setup. And the same thing happened to me. There's 75% of the angles looking at my stand, I had a nice backdrop.
From me looking at you, I couldn't hardly see you in the tree,
I was
knowing where you were.
Invisible.
Yeah.
And if sure enough, deer that were looking in my direction from that, 75 degree or that 100, like 180-degree angle, I'm all good, 300 degrees. But there's that last little sliver where the biggest bucks kept coming out of a tree line,
that main trail,
and coming down this trail.
Yeah.
And from that angle, I might as well have been flashing a neon sign from where I was at. And for some reason, I know what happened was I moved my stand to this spot after seeing a lot of bucks walk this trail. I didn't know at what point they were hitting that trail. I just knew they hit that trail.
Yeah.
From my vantage point. Well, when I set off to the side of that trail, and it was fine if the deer came from all these different directions, but if they came from that one spot, I was really skylined. And sure enough, that's where the 3 biggest bucks, they just popped out right there, and they kept pinning me. I mean, I barely moved at all.
Yeah.
And they looked right at me.
Yeah, and mine was pretty much the same thing.
When I started to have spikes and forked horns pick me.
Yeah, you knew.
I was like, okay, this is more than just me making noise.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just, it was a rookie mistake, but it was also part of learning the travel patterns and where the actual game trails were.
Yeah, because you can see why our logic was sound when you didn't exactly know where they were coming from. Because from most angles we were covered.
And not to mention, 4 or 5 days leading up to that, there was so much wind and weather that you could move around. The tree branches were moving and you could make sound, and the deer didn't care. Yeah. Well, the next 3 days in a row, you could hear a pin drop. Yeah. You could talk. Sound would go.
Yeah. Well, I still remember when you grunted at that one buck, I jumped because it literally sounded like somebody was right over my shoulder grunting.
Yeah.
When you were 160 yards away from me.
Yeah, the buck came running back toward me after it spotted Anthony. And then he stopped on a trail broadside. He wasn't going to stop, but he stopped and I went, bah, bah, just like that.
And I heard that. I was like, oh, it sounded like somebody was right over my shoulder. I kind of looked over like, where'd that come from?
Yes. And then we were like, we got to the point where we knew we could just go, hey, Anthony, how are you doing? And have a total conversation 200 yards away. And we
talked about it. And you're like, next time you're reading a book, I'm going to go, Anthony, buck on your right.
Yeah, that's all I'm going to do.
Heard it.
Because the buck would have looked around and been like, oh, there's a voice somewhere. Yeah. But Anthony would have been ready. And I don't think it would have spooked that Brutton buck. Yeah. He just would have been like, oh. And then later we had some hunters come in, and they were like 400 yards away on top of the hill, and I could hear their entire conversation.
Yeah, I've had that happen.
Everything they were saying, like, I could hear perfectly plain as day, and they weren't talking loud. They were just talking normal. So the sound, we underestimated how well the sound carries. We underestimated their vision. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about it. When we were hunting, when I've hunted whitetails and when I've hunted blacktails, we're in a forest. Yeah. A dense forest. There's a whole canopy above where there's no skylining.
Right.
Period. There's not even really an option for you to be skylined.
Right.
So the only time I've really struggled with that was when I hunted Texas out of a tree stand. Mm. And man, it was really tough because you're in some tree in the middle of nowhere, and it's just, they see you're silhouetted up on that tree against the sky. And they just pinned us like right away.
Well, my other stand setup that was over the saddle from you, I hunted that one a couple times. That was in a lot more cover, and I didn't get picked from deer out of that one.
Yep.
Had a lot more cover around me.
Yeah, so setting up, what didn't work was our setups, our locations, the playing the wind, everything was really good on that. But noise and visibility, we didn't, when I set up the final stand, I made like a ground blind in a tree.
Yeah, that one you were covered.
Like there was no way I was going to get silhouetted, seen nothing.
Didn't have as many shooting lanes, but you were not going to get picked.
And I figured that's how I would hunt like some wary whitetail country, something similar to that. So that was one thing. And then quiet. I realized that, I don't want to have to take a 40-yard shot when I can take a 12-yard shot. At the same time, there's a buffer at which these deer hear a sound and they're okay with it, and a distance at which they're going to run or spook. Yeah. And frankly, it was so dead silent that I just couldn't get away with moving at 15 yards.
Right.
Or 20 yards.
We talked about that in the hunt. We were going to have to draw at about 50 yards, even if we thought they were going to come in close.
Yep.
We're going to have to draw when they were that far away.
Yep. So you either have to be ready and prepared to draw way before they get there, or you need to be much further off the main trail.
Yeah.
You know, so that you can get drawn, and you're just going to have to take a longer shot. Now, that's a dreaded thought for a whitetail hunter because those deer just they're so fast twitch, they're just so jumpy that whitetails are notorious for dodging arrows.
Yeah.
But mule deer, you know what they do? They just sit and suck up the carbon. Like, especially big bucks. Big mule deer bucks don't dodge arrows.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, even elk dodge better than mule deer.
Yeah, no, I don't think that would have been a problem. I think we just had to refine our setup a little bit. I'm glad we'll do much better at it next time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so if you were gonna, share, like, summarize this hunt and how you would approach it for someone that wants to do a hunt like this.
Mm-hmm.
Say they're hunting in the mountains. Like, a ton of guys are right now. They're out there on their late season mule deer hunts right now, even now in some states with their bows, trying to get it done. What's your approach?
Well, I think, we talked to a local guy there who was telling us, yeah, you guys are probably smart for tree stand hunting, but I just can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you want to spot and stalk those bucks, you got to be the kind of guy, it's kind of how you describe Ryan. Like, you got to be the kind of guy that can spot a buck and go, yeah, that's not the right setup. I'm not stalking him right now. I'm not stalking him today. I'll wait till tomorrow. And I'm not very good at that.
Yeah.
I'd push the envelope and probably force a bad stalk. But those guys that do that are patient. They'll wait for the right stalk. I don't care if I don't get to stalk him today. Might not be tomorrow. Might not be the next day. I'll find him when he's in a good spot.
They're also very confident in finding that buck over and over again.
Right. And so I think that's one thing. If you're going to do it spot and stalk, you got to have that kind of mindset. You're going to, during the rut, when they're moving all the time, you got to find the right opportunity, or you got to ambush them. And when you ambush them, like what we chose to do up in the tree stand, either I think the ground blind tactic was fine. I just didn't give them enough credit. I didn't set up my blind correctly.
Mm-hmm.
I should have been, had been more broken up and not so much out in the open. And then B, if you're going to be in a tree stand, it's got to be more than just the right spot, the right wind. You've got to look at that stand from their perspective and go, what is the backdrop? Because we're not in big, thick canopies for the most part. A lot of skylining up there. You got to look at it the same way as if you were going to skyline yourself on a ridgetop while you're glassing.
Yeah.
Big no-no for mule deer. It's no different in a tree stand.
Exactly.
Yeah, you got to take that into account. And like I say, everybody love a 15-yard shot, but maybe that 30, 40-yard shot is a better setup in that stand because they'd be less, alert. I'm
always a fan of getting super high.
Yeah.
And one of the frustrating things about this hunt was the trees they weren't big enough for me to get where I wanted to get.
Yeah.
I would love to have been another 5 to 10 feet higher than where I was consistently finding myself.
Yeah.
Just because when you're that high, you're just out of their view.
Out of their view. See, and on mine, it just was a poor tree because I think if I'd have gotten lower, I would have been less visible. But now your scent's closer to the ground. It's not drifting over their heads as they come through the draw. Yeah. I don't know if I could have that tree wasn't possible to get high enough to where it would have helped. So
no, and scent is number one. Like, if you can outsmart the scent, the wind, and all of that, at least you're in the action.
Well, Ben learned that. Ben had a fantastic setup for his stand. Everything except for wind. His wind went up, down, left, right, all day long.
Herds of elk, bucks,
and everything that came in winded him.
Yep.
Eventually, and then pretty soon nothing would come in. Like, we'd see tracks from the night, but nothing was using.
Yep.
And his area looked phenomenal. Like,
he just blew it out with his scent.
Yeah. But the wind was no good.
Yeah.
It was similar on my stand in the timber there where I had some deer come in. The wind was blowing the way that I expected deer to come from, and I just did not see the deer numbers from that stand that I thought I would.
Well, my first setup, there was a lot of snow sign, and then you had some experience with where you thought deer went.
Right.
So I set up there, and 3 days in in a row, I saw deer out of range or deer that came in and circled me.
Right.
So they were winding me as well. And so that's when I was like, okay, now that I've been here, because that's often how we hunted blacktails is we get into a spot. We're like, okay, this is a migration corridor, or this is a spot where a lot of deer will rut.
Mm-hmm.
And then what we did was we'd set up, see what happens. After a couple of days, you're like, okay, I need to refine this.
Yeah.
And then you'll move your stand, instead of on this side of the trail, it's the opposite side of the trail because the wind just keeps going XYZ direction. And then, and little by little, you hone in.
Yeah, which we had to do that this last week too. But all that is just money in the bank for later.
True, because the one thing that happened to us, because we were in it, bucks rutting like crazy. The rut was in full swing. We had some close calls. One thing that was interesting was for two or 3 days, I was telling these guys, look, man, there are little spikes and forked horns and 3x3s.
You saw a lot of those
running through this spot, chasing does and stuff. There's rutting behavior. There's just a buck this way and then one that way, and one would come down the trail this way, and one would go the opposite. I'm like, okay, every hour there was something walking through. It's a matter of time before a giant shows up.
Yeah.
And that's often what we saw when we would blacktail or whitetail hunt,
It's the same in the elk rut or anything.
Yeah. You start to see all this movement, and then after a few days, boom. Now it's really
big boys
happening. Out. And so sure enough, it worked and it happened like that.
Yeah.
I feel like when we set up our stands on that, because for people who were following the story, we were in the action. On Sunday, we took a day of rest. We moved our stands to fine tune them a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then we went back on Monday and we got hit by a major snowstorm and none of the deer moved at all.
No.
There were no tracks for 10 miles. Like when we rode the quads out,
Yeah, where they were covered.
They were on the road,
crossing the road like
all
crazy.
day long. Everywhere you went, there were tracks. It was like gone. And then the next day, gone.
Yeah, nothing.
So, learning more about it and talking to the warden down there, the game warden, and other folks, that's the result really of the migration, most likely. Weather shuts them down, but like everyone typically knows is that's hunted deer during the rut like that. A lot of times the weather just shuts everything down for a day. A heavy snowstorm puts them all down, but as soon as the sun comes out, you're in it, man.
Yeah.
The animals come out of the woodwork and it just becomes, it becomes an awesome hunt. But that wasn't happening.
No, it shut down for a couple of days, which we only can figure deer just kind of moved through. That was enough snow. They got a ton of snow earlier, then nothing for a while, and then that was the first big storm since for a couple of weeks. And I think it just moved some deer out of our area.
And sure enough, after talking to a number of people about it that are familiar with it, the deer tend to migrate. So they were coming through. The weather system sort of pushed them. They moved over to further down the basin into a different area. And as we talked to the warden about it, he's like, yeah, they winter over in this area. You guys are over here. There's a lot of deer actually moved in over there. And we thought about moving over into those basins, but we had kind of pushed our limits with how many days we were.
Yeah, we'd
out
stayed
there.
An extra 2 or 3 already past when we were supposed to be home.
But I'm sure if we had been able to stick it out, the deer would start moving again, or we'd find out just tracks on the road would tell you that the deer are back in business or back in moving. But we just ran out of time.
Well, and another thing, I think that guy we met over there, shed some light on the fact that, your deer might push through and go lower. So you either can follow them.
Yeah.
Or you wait for the next group of deer. Because when our area vacated, I could glass way up in the mountaintops and see more deer. I knew not all the deer had left the high country.
Yep.
And so you just, and that's what he confirmed is, if you'd have sat there, a new batch would have come through.
Eventually, in a few days.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you can either drop an elevation and try to stick with the same deer, or you can wait it out and new deer will come through.
Yep. Just like Mount Hood.
Yeah.
Just like hunting back home. So, no, it was a great hunt. Let me ask you this, because we both are big fans of spot and stalk, and we've killed a lot of animals that way, and dude, we love it.
Yeah.
But we're also big fans of tree stand hunting.
Yeah.
And me and Ryan Lampers got into a little text debate, get out of that stand, get on your feet, go chase those things down. It's like, I've done that and I can do that. But effectively, there's a lot to be said for sitting in ambush in a tree stand, as well. So there's more than one way to skin a cat. But one thing I wanted to talk about for a lot of the Western guys that are listening is there is something awesome about sitting in a tree stand that gives you an experience that spot and stalk does not.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the fact that you are observing wildlife as if you're not there.
Exactly.
That's the cool thing you get from a tree stand.
At close range.
At close range, when you got, I sent you some of those pictures when those 4 or 5 does and that 4-point came under me. Totally oblivious, and they're 12 yards below me. Mm-hmm. And I'm just snapping pictures and taking video, and they have no clue that I'm right above them. It's pretty cool.
It is cool, and the sounds that they make, and the that kind of close encounter. I have far more close encounters where I'm able to just sit and watch the animals like a fly in their living room, fly on a wall, in a way in a tree stand that I've never been able to do on a spot and stalk.
Yeah,
because. It's just that sitting still. There's also lots of animals, like we saw weasels carting around, like squirrels and mice and these little short-tailed white weasels with these black little tip tails.
Yeah, those are cool.
Running all over the place. You see birds. You see things just in the wild, bobcats, cougars, wolves, things just sitting there all day, every day that you don't see.
Yeah, or if you see them when you're spot and stalking, you're on a quick fuse, because it's a matter of time before something's going to detect you.
Yep, and
you're going to disrupt that.
Yes.
So,
and it is really neat to be able to sit there and watch a doe and a buck. Like I watched a nice 3x3 rut a doe for about an hour at last light, and to see him dogging behind her and checking her out and her behaving the way she does, and she'd run over to him and do all this stuff and run away from him, and he was all turned on, and they were just going crazy, and they were making little odd sounds. She was squatting and doing some, and it is neat to be able to watch that and observe it, and to be honest, you and I, we've learned a lot about deer behavior just animal behavior in general, just by sitting there hour after hour, day after day, and letting things happen around you.
Well, I get a kick out of everybody, and I don't blame you if you haven't tree stand hunted. I don't blame you for being doubtful about what we're doing, but I get a kick out of everybody going, "Oh, how could you sit in that tree instead of being out, spot and stalk?" And believe me, it would be a heck of a lot easier to go spot and stalk. It's way harder mentally to sit in a stand for 10 hours a day than it is to get on the ground and just go. Mm-hmm. Like that's,
absolutely
that might seem counter, productive, but it's that physical effort of stalking and moving all day is way easier than the mental effort of sitting still in a stand all day.
Yep.
Way easier.
I would agree. And the thing that a lot of people feel, when they think about a guy that hunts out west, a lot and is into that it's not attracted to sitting in a stand. I don't blame you.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of freedom and fun that comes from a type of experience you're trying to have from being on the ground and moving. But when you're up in a tree like that and you have bucks crisscrossing below you every 30 minutes and does in heat and they're just like, they're coming in bow range constantly, the day isn't boring.
No.
It's pretty intense, actually.
No. And during that time of year, I even said there were days that we didn't, that day of the storm and the next day, did we see a deer all day?
No.
Maybe in the distance, but nothing up close. But I told you on those days, there was not a minute that went by that I didn't anticipate a buck was coming.
Yeah. A huge one.
A huge one. You expected it, which kept you occupied, kept you in the stand.
Yes.
It didn't happen those days, but you felt like it was about ready to.
Yeah. And so the thing too is it is like a chess match, trying to figure out where to sit, where to be, trying to figure out what these animals do, where they cross. And what's ironic, I've spent some time hunting with Ryan, and I tease Ryan Lampers because he'll hunt mule deer the same way we did, just he's on his feet mostly. But he'll still go and watch a certain ridge where the deer cross over and over again, and that's where he's going to sit. Yeah. With a bow in hand, there's been some times where he's like, like when we were hunting in New Zealand, he's like, man, if you go and you sit there, it's only a matter of time for a big bull tar walks over and you shoot it, and it's still an ambush hunt. Yeah. It's just, you're not in a tree or in a blind, but you're still ambushing. One thing I noticed about Ryan, like when we were coos deer hunting, he sort of put himself close, 100, 120 yards from where the coos are, where they're rutting. He's chess matching it. He's anticipating where those two are going to go and if they're going to go through this slot. And then he gets himself in that slot, and he's hoping that day that's where they walk and they come within 15 yards or 20 yards of him. And he's good at that. Yeah. But it's still a form of ambush hunting. Right. Just you are on the ground, but there was a lot of waiting and hoping that they would play by the script. And that's essentially, kind of what we're doing as well up there. But for me, I want to kill a giant deer.
That's what I was just thinking. Here's for me. I'm not good enough to be picky about how I kill them. Yeah. I'll take them any way I can get them. If I think that means sitting in a tree stand, then that's what I'll do. I'm not picky enough to go, no, I got to take it by spot and stalk.
And the thing is I don't know, you got to play by your strengths too. I'm as patient as Job, man. Yeah. Like, I can sit in that stand all day, every day. When most guys are done at like, they just can't, 2 days in, they're just dying, or 2 hours
10 o'clock, 11 o'clock.
Yeah, like Ben. Like cousin Ben. I could sit there all day, every day for 3 weeks. Yeah. Like, I will put in the time and I can I'll move that stand. I'll keep watching. I'll try to be a student of what's going on. But one of my strengths is being able to be patient. Yeah. And so some other guy's strength might be being really aggressive. And attacking. You got to know you and play to your strengths. Use as much as you want to take in the advice of everyone around you. You got to realize you too. And really, I'm very confident in my own abilities and in what I'm good at. I've learned over time, and I don't try to be somebody else. I'm me.
And you know what I'm good at is I'm really competitive, and so I'm not getting out of that stand if you're not getting out of that stand.
Exactly.
Because there were some days that's why I stayed in the stand. Like, he's not getting down. I'm not getting down. I don't care how cold I am. I'm not getting down first.
Right. Well, which brings me to like tactics. Well, gear, really. We were, a lot of people asked what worked, how do you stay in the stand all day? Well, part of the trick to stay in the stand all day is to actually to stay warm. Yeah. In conditions like that, where it's 5 degrees, and that's a hard thing to do.
Well, by the way, we've been home for just over a week now. My fingertips are still numb. Are yours?
No, mine never got to be a problem.
My fingertips all are still numb a week later.
Yeah, my toes.
Not numb, but they're deadened.
My toes, since I did that British Columbia moose hunt. Yeah. Up in BC with Dustin Rowe. Ever since that trip, my toes are susceptible to nerve damage right at the end of the toes. Like, they can get cold and go numb after a cold weather hunt for a week or two, and they come back. But I'd say my toes got a little bit like that the last 2 or 3 days because I ran out of quality foot warmers, really.
You were having to bum our bad
I had to borrow Anthony's crappy gear.
No, my fingertips are still deadened from that hunt, which I've had every year. Yeah. My hands are really susceptible to cold like that. My hands get cold. But I think we found, number one, you used a lot of that, the Sitka Fanatic, right?
Sitka Fanatic gear.
Yeah, I needed that.
I'm telling you, for people that are into tree stand hunting, especially if it's cold weather, that Sitka Fanatic bib and jacket they're awesome. Yeah. They're quiet. They've got a lot of little doodads and like pockets, and it's well thought out. Your rangefinder slides in here, it doesn't fog up because there's a vent. Like little tiny things. They feel like they've thought of it all.
Yeah.
And so it's expensive, super expensive. But like you were layering.
I had as many layers as I could have worn and still been able to draw my bow back.
And I'm like, oh, that's what you were. I just wore the jacket and the bibs today. Nothing else. Nothing.
I had everything. And then you talk about like some of this clothing that is fine to wear when you're on the ground and spotting stalking is not quiet enough when you're in a tree.
Right.
Like it makes too much noise against itself or against the tree or whatever. So.
Yes. Yeah, and so the Fanatic jacket and bibs are a game changer. If you're going to stay all day in super cold weather, it's a great it's incredible piece of gear. It makes climbing into a tree stand actually pretty enjoyable and sitting it out pretty enjoyable. And there's a lot of reasons for it. I mean, it's got that kangaroo pocket in the front, super warm and insulated, and you throw in some body warmers into that, and your hands are nice and toasty.
I would like to have a set of that for this hunt next year.
The other piece of gear that was really good was the Lacrosse Alpha Burley boots. And I think mine are 1,600 gram insulation. If they make one that's got higher insulation, I'd buy it.
Yeah,
for those.
Found that. And you still think that's better than a pack boot, like a rubber bottomed, leather topped, insulated pack boot. That's what I wonder. Like, I know you like those. I wonder how that would compare to. You got the leather to deal with as far as scent.
First of all, no deer ever smelled my tracks.
No,
ever.
You didn't have that. And I had it on every setup.
Every setup was a problem for you.
Yeah. Even if they didn't spook, they stuck their nose in it and got an alert from it.
Yep. And so I could walk up that entire road. I could climb my tree. I could walk all over the place. The deer never detected me.
Yeah.
So the rubber boots, whatever they do, they keep that scent. They keep that scent out of the air and off the ground. So I think for the sort of tree stand hunting that we're doing, that that you need a set of boots like that.
Yeah.
They're insulated at 1,600 grams, which makes them super warm.
And I think the warmest pack boots that I've been finding since I got home was about 1,000.
Yeah, and 1,600 is on the edge when it's 5 degrees.
Yeah.
Like my feet were still pushing.
Yeah, and you still needed chemical foot warmers and stuff. Yeah.
Now, I live and die in a tree stand by using external heat.
Yeah, you do.
External heat, there's nothing to replace. Like any heat that's internally driven by your body is using energy.
Yeah.
It's using your body's store energy. Any external heat that you can provide, like in a case of a fire or something, you're now soaking up energy.
Yeah.
Your body's receiving it. So having an external heat source while being in super cold conditions is a game changer. So the problem I see is a lot of people buy those hand warmers, the little tiny hand warmers.
Hand warmers and toe warmers.
And they're like the size of like 3/4.
Yeah.
They're stupid. They're so small. They just don't generate enough heat. They're the kind of thing that, mentally seems nice, and it's fine, I suppose, if you're just walking to school. But there's no comparison. When you compare some of those full foot length foot warmers, and you put that in your boot, and it's heating your entire foot, and it's large, works great. You put a little toe warmer at the front of your toes that just sticks to the front of your toes. My feet are freezing within 1 hour.
I couldn't even really tell whether they were working or not, to be honest.
Nope. And so get rid of the small stuff. Same thing with the hand warmers. Just buy the body warmers. The big body
hand warmer,
warmers.
you can feel that it's warm. It's not big enough or enough warmth to change the temperature of my whole hand.
No.
Just the spot it's touching is warm.
And I found like they just lose their heat right away.
Yeah.
So we would come back from our hunts the first week, and I would pull my inserts out of my boot and give them to Anthony, and they would be on fire, like burn your skin hot. Same with the body warmers that were warming my hands. I'd pull those out and hand them to him, and they'd be scalding hot. This is after like 10 hours in the stand.
And mine, the toe warmers and the little hand warmers, I would wait until I was really cold before I opened them, and then they would not be putting out any more warmth before I got down at dark. So you're opening yours at dark in the morning, and they're still going dark at night.
Into the next morning.
Yeah, mine I'm going mid-morning or midday, and they're cold before I get out of my stand.
And some of that has to do with how much oxygen they get. So what I found is, like when they're in your rubber boot and your boot's sealed, it locks in it makes it hotter and locks in the heat for longer. It like takes longer to burn out or something. Yeah. Same thing with the pocket. Like if I put it in my kangaroo pouch and I don't, I put it inside that pouch, it tends to stay hot. Like that whole area is hot. If I put them in like an outside pocket where the wind is blowing, they'll burn out in a few hours, and they're never really that hot either.
I think that's what I did, and I would when I took my hand out of my pocket, I would leave the hand warmer in my hand. So now it's out in the full air.
Yes,
I did that a lot. Well, that and next year I will have a beaver skin hat.
That is another thing. Like the one thing I complained about repeatedly on the hunt was my headwear. I don't like stuff that covers my ears because I want to be able to hear, but my head was often cold, and I put the balaclava or whatever over and face mask and all that, and again it covers my ears and I hate that, but then it'd be cold. But then we got those beaver hats from your buddy, dude.
Those would have been
that hat was so warm, and then the fur kind of goes down and covers the tips of your ears and kind of warms them up, but leaves your ears open so you can hear.
And even if you had the ear flaps, you could just tie them up and No, those I'll have one for next year.
Me too.
I've been already watching YouTube videos on how to make them.
Yep. So the beaver hat I think is a fur hat. A bunch of guys actually wrote in and said, you guys need real fur hats. And I'm like, really? And then coincidentally, we were there with our buddy and we tried them on. I'm like, oh, this is, I want one bad.
Yeah, me too.
So I guess, that kind of, that's the gear I like to use. I like to put the hand warmers also, body warmers, in my front pockets, and then put my overalls over that, and they're right on the side of my hip there, and it seems to just keep the core warm. But so I'll use 4 body warmers, 2 for my hands, 2 for my front pockets, and then I'll use a big foot one in each boot.
One thing we found too, or I found, gloves I don't care what glove it is, it's ineffective in that environment.
Yeah.
There's not a glove out there that will keep your hand warm. You're better off keeping them in your pockets with chemical warmers, with no glove or a super light. I actually at one point had a thick glove on one hand, my bow hand, and a thin glove on my release hand, and I couldn't feel the difference between the two.
Yeah.
They felt the same to me.
Yeah, I agree. If you're going to wear a glove, you should be wearing a mitten. So on my left hand, I'll wear the Fanat, like the Sitka tree whitetail gear blizzard mitten.
Yeah.
It's real quiet. I couldn't find it for this trip, so I ended up using my other set of mittens. But mittens are the way to go.
It's like being in the pocket.
Yep.
It's like having your hand in the kangaroo
It's like having it in the pocket.
Yeah.
So you can hold your bow in your hand in the mitten, and it's warm. It's not struggling to be warm. Where a glove, I don't know what it is, man. The gloves just
isolate those fingers, and they just freeze.
Toast.
Yeah. Didn't matter how thick the glove was.
So
next year I'll have mittens for one, and number 2, just that Fanatic gear with the kangaroo pocket was money. And actually, it wasn't until I got home I remembered I had one of those external kangaroo pouches muffs you put on, and I didn't even use it. I forgot I had it. That would have been better.
Yeah,
than nothing.
The other thing that I relied on heavily were my puffy pants, and I've relied on those for the whole season.
Yeah.
Now, having zip-on, I have the Sitka zip-on the outside, like puffy pants. So I would put those on under my Fanatic bibs.
Yeah.
And it was like wearing a little sleeping bag down layer with the bibs over it. Dude, it was money. Now, that kind of product makes a little more noise, but you're not bending and moving your lower body, really, when you're in the stand. And I didn't notice it make much noise at all. And so
underneath those bibs too.
Right. So I wore that, and then on the upper body when it was really cold, I did like putting on like a Kelvin vest, and just I did wear on my arms like a little bit warmer Fanatic hoodie.
I had so much more on than you did, and
that was colder than you were. I was freaking hot and toasty. Every day I'd sit there just like enjoying the view. Like I said, the only thing that got cold was my face and my ears because I refused to cover them.
Yeah.
But other than that, man, I was cozy. But then toward the end of the trip, I ran out of my hand warmers because we actually stayed an extra 3 days, which we were supposed to be done. And so I didn't buy enough and have enough for that. Ran out, and so I had to borrow Anthony's. Dude, it was pointless.
Yeah,
I was opening like 7 packages of hand warmers, and they weren't warming me at all.
Yeah.
And I was like, it truly is. I feel a waste of money to buy those.
Yep, I won't buy them again. Actually, I've said that before. But yeah, I tried it again, and they're worthless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to, taking the knowledge we gained from this hunt and applying it again next year.
For sure.
And
we knew going in, I knew general areas where deer cross, but when we got there to hang stands, you're like, well, where should we hang? And I'm like, I haven't looked that close. Like, I've been glassing these from a distance.
Yep.
Now we got to refine it, which is what we learned a lot this year.
Yeah, and it was so fun refining it. And
I love that chess game, really. Moving your stand. How much can I move it without spooking them? What time of day should I move it? When do we need to get into our stand?
So I do want to tell people, the story about the giant that got away. It felt good because I had honed in on this trail where these bucks were cruising. And I finally got set up. I put the tree stand there. Everything was perfect. And I had for a couple days in a row now, some smaller bucks just give me like a 12, 15-yard shot.
Yeah.
And a couple nice 3x3s that came through. And so I was thinking, okay, this is perfect. It's going to happen. Next day, it's dead silent. Like fresh snow. There wasn't a squirrel. Wasn't a bird making a noise. Wasn't a wind. It was the quietest day I've really experienced in a long time. When the buck stepped out on the trail, he was still 65 yards away. He's a long way out. Mm-hmm. And all I do is just...
Well, now hold on. I wasn't the only one looking at my phone.
I was looking at my phone briefly and looking up better than Anthony was. And I had just said something, cha-cha-cha-cha, and I heard a sound. I turned to the left and looked, and at 65 yards, this massive buck with all these stickers and junk and stuff.
You'd seen before. I'd
seen him once before. He had all this trash, heavy, chocolate horned. He stepped out onto the trail and then just looked around. And he was pretty incautious, like pretty chill. And he walks up the trail a little bit, and I'm like, so phone goes into the pouch. I twist my shoulder just enough because I put my camera right on my left shoulder. So all I had to do with my right hand is just push a button. I go over there and I move like that to push the button, and he looks right at me.
Yeah, 55 yards, 60 yards.
60 yards. Looks right at me. And I'm like,
gotta be kidding.
What? What? And keep in mind, all I got to do is move this finger and I can hit record. So I try to move it again. And he cocks his head again, looking right at me. I'm like, I'm not even doing anything. So I'm like, I'm not turning the camera on. I can't quite get there. So he puts his head down and walks. And as soon as I move my hand back down, he looks right back at me. And I realize I can't move an inch without him catching on to me. And he's just getting closer and closer to the tree stand, which is getting him more and more aware. Well, now, as he comes in and he's coming through this trail, I know where he's going. I've watched bucks do this over and over again. And he's coming down the trail. Well, my bow is in my lap because I wanted it ready, hyper ready. Okay. So it's right there. Got my left hand on it, So he starts walking up the trail, and I take that my release and I clip it onto the string. Well, he keeps walking. My adrenaline is now raging. That buck is 12 yards from me. He's right underneath me to the left.
And you don't feel like you can even move yet.
And I got I've got the release on the string now, and I'm kind of ready, but I need to raise the bow up, and then I need to draw it, So at 12 yards, I'm sitting there, and I'm going, and the thing is, it's hard to stop your adrenaline.
Yeah.
It's just, that's why we do it. That's part of the reason we do it. The buck is standing there at 12 yards, and he can hear the breathing, and his head's twitching. He's like, because you can hear everything. It's so quiet.
Yeah.
So his head's turning, he's looking, and he's like, I hear breathing. And he looks up at my tree, and I'm just frozen, like not even looking at him, just sitting there. So he starts walking a little bit, stiff-legged, like all worried.
He's nervous.
He's nervous, super nervous, and he's looking around, and when he gets to the 25-yard mark, I start to lift the bow up. I'm like, okay.
And he's kind of getting away from you now, right?
Yeah, his back's to me. His butt is facing me.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, it's now or never because he's going to walk out of range here soon. So he's at 25 yards, and I start making the move, and he kind of steps to the side. He doesn't like the sound. So I raise the bow up. Okay, now I got the bow in position. I just need to draw it. And he freezes. So I freeze, and I wait a little bit. He puts his head down. He looks around, takes 2 or 3 steps, and he starts walking. Now he's walking a little brisker. Like I can tell he's like, I don't like this. I want out. I pull my bow back, and he bolts. He doesn't even look back. He doesn't do your typical mule deer. He doesn't look in the tree to see what the sound is. Like I thought
he'd had enough of something was wrong up there.
I thought that he would at least just like look back at me.
Yeah.
When I drew, like that's what he would do. Is he just like he had been? He'd be like, "What is it I'm seeing?" He didn't. He just bolted. Didn't look back. Didn't even glance. He just ran. And when he ran, I was like, "You've got to be kidding me!" This is the buck I'd wanted for 3 days since the first time I saw him. This is why I'm sitting where I'm sitting.
Yeah.
And that buck runs on a string straight toward Anthony. And we've seen where these bucks go. They cross about 18 yards in front of Anthony on a trail. So Anthony should be at full draw. He should have been at full draw.
I should have been watching all of this.
All of this. You should have seen the whole thing's happening. It seems like an eternity to me. And the buck is running now toward Anthony. And I'm like, I look over at Anthony, and he's in a book. And I see
This
him.
is not another time. This is the first time.
This is the first time.
Yeah.
This is before he screwed up on the second one.
Later that day.
Hours later. He's reading the book, and I'm like, what? And your bow's hanging on a hook, which should never have been the case. Should have been in your lap, like ready. Buck is running straight at you, and he stops and slows down a little bit, walks a little bit, runs a little bit, walks a little bit. He's gonna run, and then he's gonna walk right in front of you at 18 yards.
I heard him jump over something. I heard a jump, which got me to look up.
And as soon as you saw him, you ditched your phone, reached for your bow, and he, on a dead run, on a trot, going straight to you, he's
at 65 yards.
At 65 yards, he slams on his brakes.
Slams it, just complete stop. And all I did was only guess, whoop, and I grabbed my bow, but about that fast. I went,
you moved too fast.
And he's over to my right, and he just, boom, locked onto that instantly.
And he did not like that movement at all. He was like,
he wasn't going to come a step closer.
He's like, I need to get out of here. There's danger behind me, danger ahead of me.
Yeah.
I just need to be gone. So he bounces up the hill, runs, but he still did the classic mule deer. He looked like he was just going to bolt and be gone. And then just before he goes off the ridge, he stops and does the look back.
Yeah. And that's the only time I got my bow, because I knew I wasn't going to get a shot. I didn't even take my bow off the hook. I just threw my binders up and got at least a good look at him right then.
Yeah. So he's staring at you, and he's looking over in my direction, like, because he knows
he's surrounded.
There's something there. So he's like, before he leaves, he's just so curious. Mule deer are just so curious. They just kind of want to figure it out. Whitetail, dude, that flag would be up and they'd be gone. They do not care. But mule deer, they're just like, what? Yeah. What is it exactly? So he's looking back. He's looking at me. He stands there for quite a while, but he's too far away.
Yeah.
And then he starts trotting down the hill, and he's going to step out on the same trail he stepped out on earlier at 65 yards. So I'm at full draw. Buck walks out, comes to 65 yards on the trail, and I'm like, mah, mah, try to get him to stop. That's when you freaked out because it's like, whoa, that's loud. And he stopped on the trail, looked at me, just didn't give me enough time. Boom, into the trees.
So both of us really should have gotten shots at that buck. I should have more so than you, because I should have been watching you with this whole dance.
Oh yeah,
and had my bow ready.
Your bow would have been ready as soon as he bolted. You'd have been at full draw, and he was behind a tree.
Yeah,
a bunch of trees,
just right up that trail.
The problem when he was going to run right to you, you'd already been at full draw. I mean, who's to say? I mean, he could have still spotted you.
Could have
just at full draw, because you were skyline so bad.
Yeah.
But
if I'm not moving and I'm at full draw, anyway, it would have been my best chance. That's for sure.
Absolutely. That sucked. And then a little bit later, I had a chance at that giant 4x4. Again, I had a chance where I could have shot him.
Yeah.
Using my 50-yard pin, aiming high.
Yeah.
And I chose to dial it to 60 and really settle. And I was like, if he doesn't give me the time and he doesn't give me a shot, so be it. And he literally was 1 second, 1/1000 was all I needed before that shot was going to break. And he walked.
So I will say one other thing. I've always shot a 3-pin slider.
Yeah.
I got home and ordered a 5-pin slider.
Yeah.
It's coming in the mail because up in that stand, I knew there was never going to be time for me to dial that sight. Well, I shouldn't say never. It was going to be really rare to have the chance to dial my sight to the right yardage and still come to draw. So I the whole time I'm in that stand, I'm going, I needed more than 3 pins.
I had a 30, 40, 50 because my 20 and 30 pretty much hit the same.
Yeah. And I was 20, 30, 40.
30, 40, 50. And I just kind of thought, well, anything beyond 50, I'll have time to range. I had probably 4 opportunities at 60 yards, exactly 60 yards, and no time to dial.
No time to dial. That's how I was. There was no time to dial on hardly any of the opportunities I had.
And I'm really confident in that range. So moving forward, I'm going to do at least probably a 4-pin.
Yeah.
30, 40.
I went with a 5 because it seemed
60.
like 60 was about all I'd want to shoot from a tree stand anyway. And yet I didn't, so many of these areas we set up, you could get a 12 or 15-yard shot, right?
Yeah.
Or you could get a 65.
Yeah.
And so, but with no time to dial, I just thought I'm just going to cover 20 to 60, and next year I'll be a little more.
Absolutely. They're rutting. They're moving. They're the one thing that's nice about when you're in a tree as well, and they are moving like that, is you can be like, that tree I know, or that snow trail they walk out on, 100% of the time, that's 60 yards.
Yeah, I've ranged that 15 times since I've been in here.
Yeah, the exact yardage. So the problem is there were a lot of 60-yard opportunities.
Lots of them.
A lot. And we had 40 and 50-yard,
Pins,
sliders. So
and not to mention, if you do have time to dial it, say you dial it to 65.
Yeah.
And then they keep coming right at you and they get to 10.
Yeah. I will say this. That's one thing that I love about the Garmin Zero sight.
Yeah.
I've been a big fan from the start. You can look at Heartland Bowhunter has been using it all year. I've killed a bunch of animals with that thing. I freaking love it.
Yeah. Because
it takes the guesswork out. And the fact is, you and I are fairly disciplined. So, and I've learned the hard way of years of experience not to take certain shots. But I guarantee you, most of the people we know, most of the friends that I have, they're taking that 60-yard shot and just holding that 50-yard high.
Winging a prayer.
And so I just think having the Zero, I'm able to, at full draw, get the exact pin that I need. I just think there's less marginal shots and there's fewer wounded animals because of that.
Yeah.
Because I think most people actually do not have the discipline not to shoot.
Right. They're going to try it anyway.
They're going to try it anyway.
So
So in my opinion, you have guys that, because the other argument is, well, if you have the Zero, you're going to take shots you shouldn't be taking. Guys are doing that anyway.
Yeah.
They're doing that anyway. Now they can do it with some pretty serious accuracy.
That they're at least using the right pin.
Yeah.
Versus, I've got my 20, 30, 40, and that buck's at 65. Just hold high.
Yep. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's all the individual, but I feel like the Zero is a tool that allows me to have precision.
Yeah.
And when it comes to killing an animal, I'd like that precision because most of the time I'm going to hit the animal.
Yeah.
It's am I going to hit it 2 inches high or 2 inches lower than I really wanted it to.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're going to survive. Sometimes they're going to be wounded and they're going to die. But I really, so far for me, personal experience with the Zero, I have been able to drill, center punch every animal I've hunted with it. And in all the ranges I've used it. Pin gapping, shooting high. There's a few shots I know that would have been pretty tough.
Yeah.
And may have led to a more marginal shot. But
Yeah, I know Ben set his up this week for Arizona, and he already just loves it. I talked to him the other day, and he just loves it. He's only been shooting it a week.
yep.
So,
And yeah, we're heading up there to Arizona to hunt, and I used it last year, killed my coos deer with that Garmin Zero last year. I love that hunt. Coos deer are especially small, tiny, like a little doggy, and small target, small kill zone, and it's hard to judge their distance.
yeah, I bet.
Because you look at them in an open desert, they look like they're 70 yards away when they're 30. Because you're used to seeing a mule deer.
Yeah.
And when it's mule deer's that small, that far away, it just looks far away. And I told you the coos deer I shot, I came to full draw. I didn't know what the range was. Came to full draw when he wasn't looking. He whipped his head back, looked at me. Well, I just put the 0 on him, and I was thinking he was 35 yards. He was 20. I think I would have missed him.
Yeah.
I would have missed him. I would have guessed, and I would have shot, and I would have missed him. And it was a small target to begin with, but I was able to, center punch.
Yeah.
Hit the exact dot where I needed to hit. So, Brinker, he actually didn't have, the same opportunity. Others, that's where that 0 really does.
Is Brinker going to put a 0 on his stick bow?
I think Brinker's he's all compound nowadays.
Oh, he is. Okay.
So,
all right.
But
I'd like to set one up for that hunt.
yeah,
I really would.
I think you should. It's a fun, and that's one of the reasons I really enjoy some of the whitetail hunts is I get to use the 0 on that. And when those bucks are chasing a doe, you can just you're at full draw the whole time.
Yeah.
Just scanning. Zzz, and then he's 35, he's 27, he's 40, comes into 22, stops for just a second. Boom, you get your pin, center punch.
That would be cool.
So it just I think it removes a lot of those quick math calculations and marginal shots that guys got to make. And whatever harvest increase is gained by using a 0, I think is offset by the reduction in wounding and lost animals.
Yeah.
My theory. I have no facts to base it on.
Yeah.
None.
Yeah.
Just my thoughts. Anyway, but it's a fun site, and by the way, it's cheaper now. I think they sell it for $700 instead of $1,000.
Something like that, or $7.99 or something.
Something like that. So they dropped the price on that 0, not because they weren't selling it; they're selling the crap out of it. But because they have the margins to do so, and it looks like it's become very popular, so they're able to sell that quantity.
Yeah, I hope it catches on.
quantity.
I hope we start being able to use them out west.
I think it'll be a long time, just like lighted knocks. They're
still
illegal in so many places. Took forever for those to come through.
But the states are falling one by one. Hopefully, it'll be the same eventually with stuff like this.
Yeah, I agree.
So.
All right. Well, folks, thanks for tuning into the podcast. If you got some questions about this hunt or the gear, send them our way. Leave the comments, on YouTube, and we can answer those questions. Brent and I will kind of go over them a little bit later. So if you do have more questions about the hunt, don't ask me where we're hunting, what state, blah, 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 what unit. I just, out of respect for everyone who hunts in all these different areas, from state to state, people in Colorado are like, don't tell people you're in Colorado. And people in Idaho are like, don't tell people you're in Idaho. Tell them you're in Colorado. And it goes back and forth.
Yeah.
Utah. And
don't ask, man. I don't ask people that.
You don't.
About a good hunt. I'm not going to ask you where you're hunting. I know better.
Yeah, it's funny. Ryan just goes like this. Shh. Someone's like, hey, so where did you guys go? He just goes, shh. And they look at him like, what?
What's that mean?
And he's just like, shh. It's really awkward.
I love that.
So
I might steal that.
Yeah, I mean, that's one question I won't answer. So
if you got any good book recommendations, send them my way.
Well, I do think you should read Jack Carr's books.
I got them. Yeah, I'm going to be reading.
In fact, I think you were. Those Terminal List and I'm blanking on the second book. I read them both. They're
I've got it on my phone right here.
They're sweet.
Yeah.
and he's about to come out with the third one. You can
really?
I think you can pre-purchase it right now. I think I already have. Yeah, I'd rather you just not buy those books until hunting season's over.
Terminalist and True Believer.
True Believer, that's
Got
right.
him right here.
So
Next up on my queue.
yeah, Jack's a stud. All right, folks.
All right.
Thanks for tuning in to the podcast. And as always, stay gritty.